بسم الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you everyone for coming out today to take time in your Saturday afternoon. I'd like to thank Masjid Ibrahim and We're Muslim for giving me this platform to share a personal story and some reflection about what I went through as a coming to the Deen. So on the agenda we have my story, the big questions, and then introducing the different ways of thinking, rational, emotional, scientific, how we got here. And if anybody has any questions after the first kind of segment of this, we can stop for a bit. Then the next segment, what am I doing here? What's the message? The miraculous nature of the Quran, where we're going, and then once again, if anybody has any questions, we can go from there. So first, I wanted to give you an introduction to myself and my background and my story actually. So I come from a family who's very secular in nature. They don't really think anything of faith, right? They just go about their lives on a day-to-day basis. They don't ponder or reflect upon why they're here or how they got here. They just take things day by day. So as being their son, I definitely followed in their path at first for quite some time. So I was a normal kid. I was involved with extracurricular activities. I would play certain things like basketball. I would hang out with friends. I was a high school kid, right? So I wasn't really involved in anything too serious. But there was one thing that was different in that the group of friends that I actually used to hang around, they were Muslim, right? So the fact that they were Muslim gave me a way to see what Islam was, and it gave me a platform to ask questions that I otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable asking or talking about. So due to the fact that they gave me a way to filter out my questions and any concerns that I actually may have had. And they also made me feel comfortable around being Muslims, and I was able to see that which was said in the media about these people being brainwashed and whatnot was all false. It wasn't really true. So to fast forward, there was one summer where I actually had went to go visit my father, and I had felt that I was coming what I had perceived as a near-death experience. Actually, I started getting asthma attacks. I started getting shortness of breathing. I had thought that I was going to pass away at the time. So to me, this really caused me to reflect upon what I'm actually doing here, right? And prior to that, a brother had actually given me the Al-Fatiha to actually read every night. So prior to that, I was actually reading and calling out to Allah. So I was starting to realize that life is so temporary, and we need something else, right? There's something else there. So to get into it more, when I got back that summer when I was visiting my father up north, when I came back to Hamilton, there was a couple months later, a brother actually invited me to come to the masjid and discuss with some brothers about the Deen of Islam. And for a couple weeks they were talking to me about Islam, about the different things, Jannah, Jahannam, the message of Islam, the simplicity of it. And I felt that it was correct. It was so simple, so easy to understand. And eventually I ended up actually accepting Islam, right? Alhamdulillah. And something that's interesting is that even though faith is based, faith here in the West is seen as something that is, it doesn't make any sense, which it really doesn't, right? Faith is something that doesn't actually make sense. So when I was introduced to Islam, it gave me a different perspective and a different way to think about the reality of life as a whole. But the main thing is that my story doesn't end there, right? That's the beginning. That's the beginning of my story, right? at that point, if any convert or any revert would be able to tell you that, at the beginning of their life, in Islam, as a newborn baby, you have this emotional outburst, this emotional burst for the first 3 or 4 months, where you're completely on Islam, and you love everything about Islam, and you want to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth, right, and discover so much, right. In fact, I had to be told to slow down, right. But then there comes a point in which, if you don't have the answers to, when those emotions go away, right, life hits you, right, and you need those questions, and then you start to get doubts, and you need those doubts to be answered, right. So, at this stage, after the 3 to 4 months, I met some brothers who, introduced me to a, new way of thinking, a new way of understanding things, how they answered my questions. So just bear with me. I want to take you through kind of my thought process in this. So, to greater understand where I'm coming from, just imagine this scenario, right? Imagine you're going to sleep one night, right? You're getting into bed. You're not expecting anything. You're not expecting to, you're expecting to wake up in the same bed in the morning. But imagine you fall asleep, and in the morning, you end up waking up on a rooftop, right? You end up waking up out of nowhere, and stranded on the middle of a rooftop, not knowing what actually happened to you, right? What would, be some things that would come to your head? What would be the first questions? What would come to your head? Anybody?
Where am I?
Where am I? That's a.
What am I doing here?
What am I doing here? Exactly.
How did I reach here?
Exactly. Right. How did I get here? Why am I here? Right. And then imagine that people start disappearing around you. You're going to be asking where you're going, right? But instead of picturing this rooftop as just a rooftop, picture it as the world, right? Picture the rooftop as the actual world that we are currently in. If we're going to come in, we're still in existence when we wake up on the rooftop, but imagine coming from non-existence into existence, right? That fact is what, triggers these questions. These questions are absolutely necessary to life. How did I get here? Where am I going? And why am I here? So in order to fully understand these questions, right, we have to view the reality around us, right? And when we make decisions, or we make any sort of big life decisions, we should base it on the reality. We shouldn't be basing our decisions on our emotions, the culture that's around us, right? It should be within the framework of what we know and what we perceive to be true, right? Because it can be said, what if there's mermaids? What if there's aliens exist? But the fact of the matter is that we don't have any access to that information, right? So there's no point of dwelling into that. So we should actually step back and think and ponder around us about the reality that we're in. So I wanted to kind of take you through a scenario just to better understand what rational thinking actually is, right? So we see this object here, right? We see that it's black, has 8 sides, right? But what allows us to know what this object is? Well, we can come to the conclusion that it's a box, right? This black object here is in fact a box. But the only way that we actually came to that conclusion and found out about what it was due to the fact that we had, our parents tell us, we had a friend tell us, we had previous information to know what to name this object, right? So our previous information came together with our current information that we have of the reality. And we used our 5 senses to pick that up, and our brain actually processed the information. So there's 4 aspects here. You have the previous information, the current information, the five senses which take in that current information, and also the brain processing which allows you to generate that thought and generate that idea of what's in front of us, right? And that's rational thinking. So for example, we have a picture here, right? Our mind, picks up that the picture seems odd, right? And there's a sense of humor that we feel inside ourselves, right? Because we know that George Bush doesn't dress like this. He doesn't look like this, right? Typically, he doesn't dress as an Afghani. It doesn't make any sense. So our mind was able to pick up that, due to our previous information, we know George Bush dresses a certain way and that he's within the Western culture. And our current information, conflicts with the previous information that we have. So this is kind of an example of what, rational thinking actually is. So then we have, another form of thinking. This is emotional thinking, right? Emotional thinking. And picture this scenario in which, imagine you're bitten by a poisonous snake and you know that this poisonous snake will actually cause you to pass away or die. But due to your faith in God, you don't want to seek a cure, right? And you know that if you don't, that you'll potentially die. But due to your faith, you're not going to go to the distance to do that. And the fact of the matter is, no one's doubting that that person doesn't have faith, right? Or that they love their religion. But that doesn't dictate the reality, right? The reality of the matter is that once you get bit by the snake, you're going to die and you need to seek a cure. And no matter how much faith you have, at that point it's not going to suffice. And, there's a recent example of, a story in Alberta, right? Where a kid actually was diagnosed with, with meningitis, right? And meningitis will eventually lead someone to death. But the parents were so caught up in, using natural, not even medicine, but natural ways to cure him, right? Even though he needed medicine, right? They didn't want to go and, go to a doctor. They refused to actually go to see a doctor and to get help for their kid, even though he had meningitis, which will eventually actually lead to death, right? And once again, no one's doubting that those parents don't love their child and that they want the best for their child. But their love doesn't dictate the outcome of what's going to happen if they don't take care of their child and bring them to a doctor to seek, help, medical help. And the parents ended up actually, going to, being tried for being responsible for their kid's death because they didn't act upon, the reality. They basically followed their emotions and they didn't go in line with the reality itself. And we have another way of thinking that is limited in use. It's called the scientific method, right? This method basically, it uses that which is observable in nature. It doesn't go outside anything that is observable. It takes observable evidence and it tests it in a lab, right? But the problem with this is that how is this going to tell you that you had a grandfather from 10 generations ago? There's really no way. The only way that one can understand that one did have a grandfather from 10 generations ago is through understanding the rules of human production, right? Because science doesn't have the bones or the evidence because it's disintegrated. So there's no way to test it in the lab to show that this grandfather of yours from 10 generations ago is related to you. So you have to use your mind in this case. And here we have a picture of Donald Trump. We all know who Donald Trump is. And there was a recent interview with him regarding David Duke, who was the leader of the Ku Klux Klan at a certain time. And keep in mind that Donald Trump has actually condemned David Duke in the past, right? So he knows who he is. And he was asked, a question in a recent interview, what do you think about David Duke and what do you think about the white nationalists, right? And he responded by saying, I don't know who David Duke is and I'm not sure about who the white nationalists are, right? But then in a second interview, he was asked, why didn't you say that you knew who David Duke was? You know what he claimed? He claimed that he actually didn't hear the question. He said that there was something wrong with his earpiece, right? He claimed to not even know what was said. And the reason for this actually is because he wants to basically please both parties of the population, the racists and the non-racists. So by taking a middle stance, he's pleasing both. So that's his reason for actually doing this. But from a scientific perspective, right, by just using the science method, how could we actually, there's no way for us to actually prove if, Donald Trump is lying because we don't have, the access to the sound waves and to hear, the sound waves going into his ear at that time, right? But what we do know is that he repeated the exact same question that the questioner asked, right? So by using our mind, once again, by using our rational, mental faculty, we're able to come to the conclusion that, this man is in fact lying, right? He repeated the question. That's absolutely impossible for him to repeat the question that the questioner asked and not know what the questioner asked, right? But once again, science, there would be no way for science to prove this. This is using our mental faculty and our, rational thinking. And here we have a picture of Greece, right? And how many people have actually been to Greece here, right? I myself haven't actually been to Greece, but I believe it exists, right? But science can't tell me that. Science can't tell me that Greece actually exists because science deals with that which is observable in nature and it has to be there, right? But what I do know is that I've come to the amount of interactions that I've had and the amount of people that I've come across and the fact that the whole entire population is in agreement that Greece exists is what allows me to understand rationally that Greece is in fact a country. Not all of these people would not, lie to me, right? Because there would be no reason, and it's impossible, right? But science, there would be no way for the scientific method to prove that. We understand that once again through using our rational thinking and coming to a conclusion that, in fact, I haven't been there, but I know Greece exists, right? And, for myself, this was kind of the way of thinking that I had to go about, right? It didn't make sense for me to use any other way at that point. So, now that we've kind of come to the conclusion that the rational method is, the correct way, right? The rational method is the only way that it can be used to answer these questions about how we actually got here, right? Science isn't going to be able to tell you that, right? Emotions aren't going to be able to tell you that because they don't dictate the reality, right? But what does is our thinking, right? And this is what I had to personally do myself, right? There's really only 4 possibilities here. It's either the universe was self-created, it's either, the universe came from nothing, it's either, the universe was eternal, or there was actually a creator behind everything. But, ask yourself this, can there actually be a 5th possibility? Right? Can there really be a 5th possibility other than these 4 options here? So to get into the first one, self-created universe. I mean, this is simply absurd, right? This is basically like saying that your own mother would have to give, birth to herself, but that would require her to be in existence and non-existence at the same time, right? Just as the universe itself would be required to be in existence and non-existence. But from, viewing the natural phenomena that's around us, this doesn't make much sense at all. As Allah says in the Quran, were they created by nothing, or were they themselves the creators? Right? He's asking a rhetorical question to make us ponder and make us think, right? Did we create ourselves? Do you remember creating yourself? You can't even remember that, right? We can't even We don't even control what's inside of us. Our heart beating, the processes that occur, right? Our thinking, the brain processing. We don't even control any of that. So how are we creators of ourselves? And then, what about the universe? A universe from nothing. Can the universe come from nothing? Well, we have a blank slide here. If I didn't, put words into the slide or time it to come in, time the words to come in at a certain point, would words just appear on the slide? Right? Absolutely not. From nothing, nothing comes. Right? So that leaves us with two options. Is the universe eternal? Right? Well, that would actually require something that is not true. That would require matter to be unlimited. That would require matter, the very universe that we exist in, to be unlimited. But the fact of the matter is, everything is dependent and everything is limited in nature, right? And if the universe were infinite and eternal, that would require that there be an eternal set of events, meaning that we would have never come into existence in the first place, right? Like, picture this scenario. Imagine, the ice cream truck has come into the neighborhood and you want to take your kids to get some ice cream. But, the problem is there's an infinite amount of people in the lineup to get that ice cream. Would you ever, reach the front? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's similar with the universe, right? The universe, once again, cannot go back infinitely because we would not be here. There would be no way for us to come into existence at a point in time if the universe be eternal. And since we've established that the universe is limited and it has a certain time frame, right? That means that there can't be an infinite amount of limited causes, right? The universe had to have come from something that is eternal, something that is unlimited, and something that has no cause, right? Otherwise, once again, it would just be an infinite loop, right? Because who created that limited, which created that limited, which created that limited? There needs to be a point. And to, greater explain this and for, you guys to understand this more conceptually, I wanted to actually do an activity. So, I guess we'll use you three. If you guys can move in together, closer together, everyone can view them. If you guys can stand up, actually, yes. All right. If you can stand, I guess, next to each other, or one behind the other. Yeah. Thank you. So when I tell you, when you feel a tap on your back, tap the person in front of you. Okay, ready? Go. You have to make sure that there's a tap on your back first. Yeah. So Ozira, when you feel the tap on your back, then go. What happened? There was no causation, right? So that means that nothing, sprouted into existence because there was no initial cause, right? But in order for that to occur, there needs to be that initial starting point. And now, tap the person on the front. There you go. Now there's a chain of events, right? So it's clear. You guys can sit down now. Thank you. So it's clear now that it's important that there be an initial causation. Otherwise, nothing would actually sprout into existence. There would be nothing. So really, the only conclusion that I personally was able to come to, using my thinking faculty and rationally thinking about the reality around me, was the fact that there's a creator. There must be a creator. There's no other option. There's no fifth possibility. This is the only conclusion that we can come through by viewing the reality. Now, if anybody has any questions, we can pause here for a bit. Any questions in the audience?
Could you give an example of I guess, a situation that is, I guess, like, I mean, especially for yourself as a convert, that if you were speaking, for example, a Christian about why why emotional thinking is not right and why they have to think rationally, like, how would you convey that to them? Because, for example, you know, I just recently was interacting with a Christian and they keep talking about their experience
Right.
with Jesus.
Right.
So how do you establish to them that this, as an example, is not a way to believe in anything? How do you,
Right.
what would you do?
Right. So to actually repeat the question, the questioner is asking, how do we convey to the, to a Christian when they talk about their personal experience, right? And saying that the reason that they believe is because of their experience with Jesus. And how do you convey to them that this isn't really the correct way of going about it, and the fact that we should be using our mind to actually come to this conclusion, right? Well, once again, it comes down to the fact about, as we talked about before, emotional thinking, right? Emotional thinking, right? The fact that they had, a personal experience with, as they say, Jesus, doesn't really, right, affect my reality, right? It doesn't affect everybody else's reality. It's just that person, right? So the fact of the matter is, it should be based off of that which is objective. That's something that everybody can taste, something that everybody can actually see, and it's something that everybody can actually come to a conclusion, right? Like the fact that we all agree that, the wall is a solid. The fact that we agree that, when you go into water, you sink, right? But when something is limited to that person and it's based on a personal experience that has no effect on myself or yourself or others, it's just that person going out there and taking, as they say, a leap of faith and believing that they actually had that experience when there's no evidence to actually prove this. There's no evidence from the reality to actually prove this case. Any other questions? You can move on, inshallah. So now that we've established, how we got here, the question is, what am I doing? Right? Why am I here? What's the purpose of me being here in the first place? And something to reflect upon and something to take in is the fact that we have no way to sense this. Right? We have no way to perceive this and understand why we're here. We can't understand our purpose without the Creator telling us. Right? We need the Creator to send us something to show us why we're here. And we're very limited in nature. We can only see so far. We don't have all of the parts of the puzzle piece, right? Because we're just human beings. And it also boils down to this question. Is guidance from man, or does it come from the Creator, right? I can tell you myself that why would I have accepted Islam? It doesn't make sense that I would have accepted Islam if, we are capable of giving guidance, right? The fact of the matter is that I recognize that there needs to be, something higher that has more knowledge than me, has all of the knowledge, that can tell me my purpose, that is capable of organizing my relationship with Him, right? Otherwise, there would really be no need for me to leave my previous way of life and come into Islam. So for me, taking this step was the most important part. It's recognizing that you're weak, that you're incapable of knowing what your purpose is without the assistance of the Creator. And then it comes to a point where you ask, well, if the Creator decides to send me a message, then how do I know what it is? How is there any way for me to find out and understand what this message means? And if it's true, if it's actually from the Creator. Well, here we have a picture of Jim Jones, right? Jim Jones was responsible for the deaths of approximately 909 people, right? He actually caused 909 people to commit suicide because he said that God had told him so. And he convinced these people that, he was a prophet and that God was revealing to him that, you guys had to, end your life. But what's the difference between him and Ibrahim alayhi salam? Ibrahim alayhi salam was actually asked to sacrifice his child, but it was actually from the Creator, as opposed to this, right? This guy where he was just making something up. But how do we know the difference between those two? How do we know that this guy actually wasn't a prophet? Well, let's take the beautiful saying of our dear Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he said, "There has not been a single prophet except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him miracles because of which people believed in him. I have been given the inspiration, the Quran, as my miracle, which Allah revealed to me." Right? So in order for us to truly know who a prophet or a messenger is, there must be a miracle attached to it. There's no way for us to know otherwise. So what is a miracle? What is the requirements of a miracle? Well, a miracle is something in which a human being is incapable of replicating, right? There's a natural law in the universe which is broken, right? And there's no way that a human being is capable of breaking this law, right? Like you rising the sun from the west, right? Or you walking on water. You're incapable as a human being of doing these things because we are subjected to the laws of the universe and there's no way for us to break it. So in order for something to be considered a miracle, it must break a law that's within the universe, and a human being can't be capable of replicating what has happened. And number two, the miracle should be preserved. There should be a way for us to see. It should be tangible for us to understand what this miracle is, right? Because if it's corrupted, for example, if it's a book and a human being goes and, fathoms with it and basically changes it up, then it's no longer a miracle as a man, a human being has actually changed it. So it must be preserved and it must actually be outside of our human capacity. So, the Quran is a miracle. So I wanted to, take you through this to get you to understand what I'm saying. And to me, this chart is great for understanding this conceptually, right? And being able to take it in. So we have, Moses, Musa, who is famous for him being able to turn the snake, his staff into a snake by the permission of Allah, right? And so he would, do this and practice this in Fir'aun's court, where he would, to prove to Fir'aun that he was actually a prophet sent by God, he would take the staff and it would turn into a snake, right? So what Pharaoh decided to do was to get him to battle the experts in public, battle the experts in a quote-unquote, magic battle to see whose magic is better. Because at that time, the experts, right, the general people were experts in the art of magic, right? So Pharaoh wanted to get Musa to challenge his people in this. So to fast forward, when Fir'aun decides to cast his staff down, it turns into a snake and actually eats all of the other fake snakes. And the magicians, the experts in magic, actually ended up submitting to Allah, right? Because they realized that this couldn't have been from man, right? There's no way for man to put down a snake and to put down a staff and turn it into a snake. This is outside human capacity, right? There's no way. And the experts submitted to this. And the Quran, similarly, is known for its, linguistic structure that is imitable. Basically, no one is capable of imitating the Quran or producing something similar to it in nature, right? And, the people of 7th century Arabia were experts in the Arabic language, right? They would spend years, decades, just writing a poem to perfect it and its linguistic style, its eloquence, and its beauty, right? And they would, to celebrate, their poems, they would actually hang it up on the Kaaba in gold. And the Arabic style in which the Quran is revealed is outside of human capacity, right? The Arabs at the time, in which their expertise was, as discussed, as Arabic, they were incapable of actually, producing something similar to the Quran. And many, ended up actually converting to Islam because of this, right? They accepted the fact that they were incapable of doing such a thing. And there's a famous story actually about, some leaders of the Quraysh, in which they, would, Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan is actually the one who narrated the story, radiyallahu anh, who, because, he ended up accepting Islam later on, alhamdulillah. He talks about how they, would go by and listen to the Quran of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was reciting it. They would go by and they would end up running into each other for something around 3 days straight. And they had to get together and say, okay, guys, we have to stop doing this. Because they understood that, this was something that it wasn't normal. It wasn't from a human being, right? And Abu Jahl, leader of the Quraysh, actually said, our tribes have been competing for so long, right? Our tribes have been competing for so long, but now they have a prophet. So basically, what are we going to do? Right? So that he admitted that, that this is from God, but he just didn't want to accept it. So even his enemies, his greatest enemies, right, never claimed that Muhammad wrote this. And so the Quran Allah challenges mankind to bring a surah like the Quran, a chapter like that of the Quran. So he says, if you are in doubt as to what we have revealed from time to time to our servant, then produce a surah like thereunto, and call your witnesses or helpers if there are any besides God, if your doubts are true. So basically, Allah is challenging the community of the experts in the Arabic language to produce something of similar style, structure, eloquence. And to understand this picture, the scientific community, right? When somebody is a scientist, they have to publish their work to prove that they're scientists, to get all of the other the scientific experts to view their work and to confirm that what this man has researched and what he has produced proves that he's a scientist, right? Similarly, the Arabic community must agree, Arabic community of experts must agree that whoever produces something similar to the Quran, they have to come to a conclusion that they have in fact, ended the challenge and, made many Muslims to convert outside of Islam, to leave Islam, right? Just as the science, community would require someone who is a scientist to produce a paper on science, it's the same with Arabic. The community of experts must agree, besides God, right? They're the witnesses that this person has actually done so. And in history, this has never happened, right? For 1400 years, no one has actually been capable of bringing something, according to the experts of that field, similar to the Quran. In fact, the Quran is known as its own style. As there are 16 styles of Arabic, in which when someone is writing anything in Arabic, right, poetry or prose, it ends up falling under one of these 16 categories. This is just to get you to understand and give you a little taste of what this actually means. It ends up falling under one of these 16 categories. But the Quran makes sense, still poetry, still prose, but is outside of these 16 styles. It's basically broken the rules, but still makes sense, right? And it's clear that no one's been capable of doing such a thing to this day. So that being said, there's only four sources of the Quran, right? It's either it came from a non-Arab, it came from an Arab, it came from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Could you guys think of any fifth possibilities? Right? Are there any other possibilities? Aliens, Satan, right? I mean, these are really the only four, once again, rational proofs or possibilities. It couldn't have been non-Arab, simply because non-Arab can't speak Arabic or he can't write Arabic, right? So there's no way for them to go for the challenge of the Quran. It wasn't the Arabs because they were incapable of producing, right, according to the experts, a chapter like the Quran. They were incapable. Till this day, no expert in the Arabic language has been capable of doing such a thing. So it couldn't have been the Arabs at the time. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not an option because he was an Arab himself. And we have hadith. And we have we have his sayings. So when he talks in hadith, when he speaks hadith, it's completely separate from the style of the Quran. Right? It's not in the same style. They're not, they're completely actually parallel from each other. It's completely separate. Right? And on top of that, his greatest enemies, the Quraysh, they fought him in battles. They fought him. They tortured them. They pressured him. Right? They sanctioned him out for 3 years. I mean, and all they had to do was just produce the shortest surah, which is Al-Kawthar, which is only 10 words, and they would have destroyed Islam. That's it. It would have been over. But instead, they resorted to these extreme means by fighting him, by pressuring him, by trying to torture him, torturing and killing his companions. Allah grant them all Jannat al-Firdaus. And all they had to do was produce, a similar surah. So from rational deduction and deducing all of the possibilities, the only real possibility that comes to mind is that this is actually from Allah. This Quran, which is revealed, has broken the just like at the time of Musa alayhi salam, has broken the the rules and laws of the universe through linguistics, right? Just as in Musa's time, it broke the laws of the universe through the staff turning into a snake. So really only Allah is capable. And this is the conclusion that, I had come to, right? And that I had understood, and that, I had understood that I had to now follow and weigh and believe in this and take it on as my way of life. So now the question becomes, where are we going? We've established how we got here. We've established why we're here. Now the question becomes, where are we going? Well, something that we need to consider is that if we don't have rational conviction in Allah and true rational conviction and true iman, then that means that our actions are on stake. That means that our actions and our iman and our belief is at stake. And that in turn means that on the day of judgment, when we stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could be going to the hellfire if we're not completely convinced. So we must be sure that we understand the deen conceptually and rationally. Otherwise there can be some serious consequences, right? And if there's one thing to take from this, this is it, right? You can throw out the whole entire presentation and just take this point. Is that we need to understand the deen properly from as to why it's true, because we'll be seriously affected. There can be some serious consequences if we don't, right? And Allah says, those who remember Allah standing, sitting, and lying on their sides, and reflect upon the creations of the heavens and the earth. Our Lord, you have not created us in vain. Glory be to you. Save us from the chastisement of the fire. May Allah protect us from going down that road, and allow us to understand Islam conceptually and be completely convinced from it for 100%. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر